South Africa's Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene's maiden mid-term budget speech had no big shocks. It did, however, point to tax hikes and a battle with civil servants. This is Tonight Live. I'm Bruce Whitfield. To discuss the mini-budget, I'm joined by Mohammed Nalla, who's the head of strategic research at Nedbank Capital, and George Glynos from ETM Analytics, where he's the managing director. He's also an economist. Twitter open for your questions, of course. You can tweet me at Bruce Business and put the hashtag Tonight410. Get your questions coming through to us this evening, and I'll do my very best in the next 12 minutes to put them to my erudite panel. What do you make of it, George Glynos? He didn't have very much to work with, and he took a piece of bubble gum and he stretched it.
Yeah, look, I think, Bruce, I would have preferred to have seen this sort of strategy adopted a couple of years ago. I think they've been a little bit too pro-cyclical, if I had to come up with a criticism of what's going on at the moment, because effectively now the reason why tax collections are down is because the economy is not doing particularly well, and on top of it we're talking about tax increases. You know, this is the sort of thing we should have been implementing a year or two ago when the economy was a little more buoyant than it is right now, because now it's effectively looking like a bit of a double whammy for a household.
Yeah, but a year or two ago we were headed towards an election, of course. It would never have gone down well. This is politics after all. What is your take on it, Mohammed?
I mean, effectively, the rock and the hard place has been there for a long time. I must say, I mean, the official stated policy is being counter-cyclical. And as George says, the kind of moves we're going through now, I mean, the red ties for an austerity budget. Okay, the fact of the matter is that this unfortunately comes at a time when globally you're going to be seeing tightening monetary policy. Locally, you're seeing tightening monetary policy. So unfortunately, it's going to mean that we're going to have to tighten those belts ever further. For me, it's less about the spending. It's more about efficiency of spend. I mean, Minister Nene himself said, We've mapped out the plans, we've done the plans, it's about implementation now. And that's really where I guess this medium-term budget really leaves one, effectively wanting.
It's not about spending, but he is cutting about 25 billion rand off departmental budgets, trying to save a bit of money, George, but that's not going to be enough. We face inevitable tax increases. I was speaking to the minister earlier on this evening, and he wouldn't commit to the tax increases, There's some kind of, a financial hocus pocus we can pull out of the hat in order to ensure that the impact is minimized. But it's coming, surely.
It is coming, but I think we need also a little bit of perspective. I mean, this reduction in the expenditure, it's more of a reduction on growth that we've seen as a trend through the course of the past few years than it is necessarily a physical cutting of any significance to expenditure. So that's kind of like the first thing. The second thing is, I definitely agree with Mohammed on this one. There's a lot of wasteful expenditure. If one has a look at Auditor General's assessments of wasteful expenditure that's taking place in the South African economy, there's more than enough if we just have a look at efficiency of expenditure within the different ministries to be able to more than make up what they're talking about as being the shortfall that they're going to try and make up with tax hikes. Now, me personally, I'd prefer to see efficiency of deployment of funding than just simply lambasting households and businesses and consumers with more tax.
It's not just about tax, is it, Mohammed? Because also in there is, if you read the subtext, we're going to lend more money to Eskom and make more lines available to Eskom so that we can minimize the worst impact of electricity price increases. We're getting that impact. I asked him a question on e-tolls. Those are not going away. There's a commitment to e-tolls. There is a commitment to raising the cost of living for ordinary South Africans.
Well, Bruce, that's rather skeptical. I must say. So I'm gonna actually turn this on its head. I was quite optimistic.
I dare you.
Let's go for it.
George on this side.
Let's go for it. I mean, George is very bearish. I've got you on the other side. I'm the guy in the middle. What he said on Eskom, I think certain hints of some positivity coming through there. So first and foremost, I think the commitment to divesting from non-core assets or non-strategic assets. That's a big positive. It means less government involvement, more private sector. Incidentally, they're looking for around 20 billion, and if you read between the lines there, maybe it's coincidental, but their stake in Vodacom is worth around 25 billion.
We've heard the speculation, right? But he's not committing also to divesting from said assets. They're going through a process of assessing whether or not they should put it on the table. I mean, it's an early stage. It's early stages yet.
Yeah, but effectively, I think the intent is there, and let's give credit where due. So that's the first thing.
No, the intent to do the study is there. The intent, once you take, look at pension reform. Okay, sorry to keep you out the fight. You're welcome to join anytime you like, George. Look at pension reform, for example. We're on the cusp of having cutting-edge pension reform. Kasatu then goes, I don't like the fact that you're going to make pension saving compulsory, and we don't like the idea that you need to preserve funds. No. And suddenly pension reform is pushed out 2 years. The moment you talk about privatising state-owned assets and actually making them run efficiently, do you think Cosatu is going to buy that? This is a battle for years to come.
It's a battle that needs to be had. And like I was saying, the other positive thing is they're not actually extending the size of the guarantees they're issuing to Eskom. So for now, I actually think some positivity on that front. It's why you saw bond yields rally today. It's why the rand hasn't really reacted. So I'm going to try and take the positivity out of this, because otherwise we're going to be sitting here trying to slit our wrists.
No, absolutely. Papa Bear, this evening, because we got the Perma Bull on this side. I'm looking for your tweets, incidentally, as well. At Bruce Business, I've got my handy wireless device with me in studio. There's a comment here. I know where the finance minister can find another 250 million rand. It's hidden in the hills of KwaZulu-Natal. And it's that kind of thing that would make it very difficult for government, in the same way as people have rebelled against e-tolls, to start raising taxes without giving some sort of public commitment or show of commitment to reining in their own spending.
Look, you raise a very valid point. It rings hollow when, you've got this sort of profligate type spending that's happening on one side. And let's be honest, 250 million in the context of a 1.2 trillion rand budget this isn't really the big issues. The big issues are some of the things we're discussing this evening. But it does ring hollow when you've got the leadership of a country spending like that, and yet at the same time we're trying to rein in expenditure. But to the point that you guys were discussing a little bit earlier, I hold a slightly different view when it comes to this whole issue of privatizations. I think it's inevitable. I think privatizations are going to be coming whether the government likes it or not, because they have run out of fiscal room.
Yeah.
There really is not much more in the way of options available to them. And if you just have to look at Europe as a great example of how governments were forced down a particular line of thinking, not because they wanted to, but because they didn't have a choice. And I think South Africa is very close to that point. I don't think we've got that much more room to be able to play with, maybe a little bit. But you speak to the credit rating agencies, and they want to see delivery of what we're talking about before they really turn around and say, okay, we'll accept the budget for what it is.
I chatted to Conrad Royce from Standard & Poor's earlier on this evening as well, and said to him, so we bought ourselves some time? And precisely that. We've bought time to the budget, because the budget in February is going to be the big test. It's going to be the litmus test as to the support that Nhlanhla Nene has got as the new finance minister to push through, one, the cost savings, and two, to do the hard work and to do the convincing through government.
Undoubtedly so. And I mean, that's really the big kicker. I mean, that's when you're going to get clarity on the tax reform that's going to come through. But all of this, let's go back to the whole concept of buying time, because that's literally what is done at this medium-term budget. It's what they've done at successive budgets over the last couple of years. Like George says, we should have seen some of this kind of strong rhetoric a little while ago. What we desperately need in this country is proper structural reform. And they kept on alluding to this NDP, but that lack of congruency between what we're starting to see drill through in terms of implementation and what the NDP idealistically says, that gap for me is quite concerning. And I think, yes, maybe the ratings agencies will give them the benefit of the doubt over the shorter term, but really we need to roll up the sleeves and start punching, because at the end of the day, we want to be making these adjustments on our terms and not when we force down that route and doing that on someone else's terms.
And to Mohammed's point, lest we forget, I think we're on IPAP version 6. I think it's version 6 right now. So we've had a full 5-year term of IPAPs, and we're now going into a second 5-year term of more IPAPs. And thus far, I have yet to look at the productive sectors of the South African economy and think to myself that there's been any meaningful reforms or changes for the good that I can see. In fact, if anything, I would argue that through the course of all of these IPAPs, there's been degradation in the productive sectors. If you have a look at the mining sector, it's shrunk. The manufacturing sector has gone absolutely nowhere. And for all of those people that believed that a weaker rand was going to be a savior to a lot of this, it's been proven to be factually incorrect.
Although today we do see a little bit of hope on inflation. The CPI number came out today from 6.4 down to 5.9. Oil prices playing ball. The rand is not losing its shirt, which is nice as well. There's a little bit of relief coming in there. That's a positive year end. Is it? Neither of you. You look both look at me as if I'm completely mad.
I think it is. No, look, it is. And inflation's probably going to come off even further. So let's just say
so
they're
puts
not
rates on hold.
But are we not clutching at straws here? I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the drivers behind that lower than expected inflation print, they're all exogenous. Like I guess, like the upside pressures were exogenous. It's fuel prices, food prices have come off. So again, it's not of our own doing. It's not because we're doing a fantastic job. It's circumstances helping you out. It's buying you some time. So perhaps we don't get the hike in November.
But we need to use this time, and we need to use this time productively and effectively.
Absolutely.
What are the things that he needs to do before the budget? Because the biggest one is going to be, the biggest test, March next year, when we don't have a civil service wage settlement. We have nurses leaving babies in incubators once again, just like they did after the World Cup, as civil servants go on strike.
Well, look, Bruce, I think he's done a pretty good job of framing the debate that he needs to have with the unions now. So the debate is very clear. It's the pool of money is only so big, it can only stretch so far. Wage demands of 15% have to have a knock-on effect in an environment where the fiscal space is so constrained. So it's either job losses, or we're going to detract from people that potentially need the funding a lot more than those of us that are employed. So, when you put it in a context like that, it becomes a lot more difficult for the unions to simply argue as aggressively as perhaps they have. It's also turned it into more of a national debate, more generally speaking, which I think is again long overdue, and comes on the back of all the strike activity that we've had this year, which has been massively destructive. So all in all, if behind the scenes he started prepping the unions and started prepping the negotiations in a way that we can get more of a smooth transition and try and get as close to possible to the inflation number, I think that would be a huge success story for him and would lend massive levels of credibility. So that would be my suggestion to him between now and the budget, is try and focus on something like that, because the wage bill in government is a massive problem right now.
It is. The substantial amount of South Africa's national budget is drained away through quite considerable public sector wages. What's the thing that scares you most about today, Mohammed? You're positive, you're optimistic, you're seeing the silver lining. For those of us who's seeing the cloud, do you accept
there's a lot of cloud.
Do you accept we're right to see some cloud?
Absolutely. I mean, when I try and find the silver lining, I mean, there's this massive cloud and there's a very thin lining around it. Let's not fool ourselves. I mean, the minister used the number. It was around 30% of the budgeted expenditure goes to compensation. Now, that public sector wage bill is monstrous, and whether he wins this battle or not, that for me over the next 6 months is really quite pivotal, because that's the watershed. It's whether the more kind of centrist, pragmatic parts of government actually win this, or do we get the more leftist, labor-orientated movement winning this battle? And I guess we're going to find out pretty quickly. But the silver lining I'm looking for right now is we've gone through the national election, local governments more around service delivery, cooperative governance, and maybe, just maybe, that gives national government a little bit of space to start flexing their muscle, pull people in line. So cautiously optimistic, but heck, it's a difficult one.
There we go. We've turned him. Mohammed Nalla, the head of strategic research at Nedbank Capital. George Glynos, the managing director at ETM Analytics. Thanks for coming in live this evening, and thank you for watching. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow. Till then, good night and goodbye.